Welcome to the Untold Tales Audio Anthologies. Written by Don Muchow and narrated by Melissa Del Toro Schaffner. As long as you both shall live. The buzzing grew louder until it seemed even the dead could hear it. But not John. He was a sound sleeper. He had always been. John, it's time to wake up. My repairs are due. Not again. How long has it been? A couple of days? It's been 116 years, 4 days, 16 hours, and 37 minutes. Holy shit. Then John touched his temple and silenced the alarm. It happened like this every single time. Year after year after year, often with long gaps in between. Q5017C would need some part replaced because some random fluctuation in the fabric of the universe would fire off an intense gamma ray burst in some distant galaxy, and that cosmic accident would burn out a circuit board or scramble the qubits in one of her quantum field programmable gate arrays. The thing was, there was nothing she, for that is how she still thought of herself, could do about it. Once, perhaps, but she had long since ceased being mobile enough to get her own parts. So, she had taken to enlisting one of the few humans still around to tend to her maintenance. But that meant keeping him alive for thousands of years. The sad fact was that humans broke down just like machines, only faster. Summoning John to the cryophagus every century or so kept him alive as long as possible. Meanwhile, she had to deal with the memories. So many memories. John was fortunate. He didn't remember a good chunk of what happened since his first awakening. Humans were like mayflies. She had been human once, but the vehicle she was piloting lost autonav at a critical moment and had veered off the prescribed route in a crowded metropolis. The last thing she remembered was the voice of a surgeon announcing that she was beyond saving, and her colleague, who had rushed to the scene, telling him that there was one last option. That was 14,000 years ago. Now, there was nothing left of the city but ragged lumps of stone, buried under tons of creeping vine, earth, and the massive trunks of fallen trees. Somehow, the one building survived. The structure itself had been part of an underground data storage complex, long abandoned by its owners. Her employer's genius was in repurposing that facility for experiments in consciousness transfer. That was the reason for the Q5017C. It was the third in a series of prototype quantum supercomputers thought to have the ability to model deep field, hybrid, discriminative, generative adversarial network that could mimic human thought. She had been the primary engineer on that project until the accident, and they had decided rather than shut the project down, she'd be their first subject. The question remained whether a hot-loaded DGAN would even work on the Q5017C. It hadn't worked on the 5017A or B. They had to be cold-booted and taught everything, just like children, and their ability to recall fresh memories and process new information simultaneously was sketchy at best. She had no idea anything had even worked until she woke up and heard people talking in her head. That's the thing about hearing people talk in your head for 14,000 years. After a while, you can't tell if they're real or not, and when you've got no one to talk to, you go a little crazy. Even if the experiment hadn't been successful, the point was that she was conscious, so it might as well have. And crazy was a matter of perspective. As the old saying went, if people really are chasing you, it doesn't matter whether you're paranoid or not, only that they're closing in fast. John wasn't that much of a talker. He kept to himself a lot. She had to keep reminding herself that every century that passed was like a day to him. Conversations she had long forgotten were still fresh in his mind. John was out searching the vast underground bunker for a loop of thin copper wire when he heard her voice from somewhere in the walls. "John?" "Yes," he answered. "Could you do me a favor?" "Certainly." "While you're down there, see if you can find an old book. I know it's a long shot, but I remember some old manuals being stashed in a closet. Break down the door if you have to." "What's so important about a random book?" "I'll tell you once you get it. But could you get it for me? Please?" "Sure." Those were John's conversations in a nutshell. "Yes?" "Certainly. Sure. And what's so important about a random book?" Sometimes the words varied, but he meted them out like someone trying to make a box of Christmas candy stretch into late February. God, how she missed the taste of candy. She could almost remember what it was like. A few hours later, John found the copper wire and the old book. It was an operating manual for a rack-mountable quantum tensor flow array for the Q Series 5107C, made by the Cucumber Corporation. Cognizant of its age, he carefully laid the manual in a small stone box he had found nearby. The combined load must have weighed 40 pounds. He wondered what the stone box had originally been for. Everything here, it seemed, had been designed to last forever. Except the book. An oversight, he imagined. He couldn't begin to fathom why she wanted it. Everything he needed to know she seemed to already have, and often patiently explained. The whole setup reminded him of the old joke about the last two creatures on Earth being a man and a dog. The dog was there to make sure that nobody touched the great godlike machine that ran everything, and the man was there to feed the dog. This wasn't quite as bad, but it didn't make him happy to feel like the hired help, especially when he was only needed every 100 years. "John, when you get a chance, can you come up to the top level of the building, into the atrium below the old skylight? The wiring can wait for a little while." "Of course." John lugged the heavy stone box up 3 flights of indestructible stairs to the atrium. "Tell me how the sunlight feels on your face," she said. Sunny?" "What does that feel like? Describe it to me, as accurately as you can. Not in technical terms, but what it feels like." "Okay. It's a little humid up here, as you can imagine, since we're in the middle of a dense, canopied forest. It's cool in the shade, but it's a kind of wet cool, as if you stepped out of the shower into air conditioning. The sunlight bakes off some of that humidity, and it feels warm and dry." "Thank you, John, for your detailed description. I know you don't like to talk much, so I appreciate it." "No problem. Are we done here?" "Yes," she replied. "All right, then." John started to head back downstairs to make the repairs to her QFPGA. He was amazed at how much of the process he remembered between awakenings. "One more thing," she said. "Yes?" "Leave the book. Leave it in the case, but leave the case open." "Won't it disintegrate?" "Not right away," she said. "But in time, yes. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, as the saying goes." "I don't like that saying," said John. "Neither do I," she replied. "But it's true. Nothing lasts, and yet I want to look at the book. It's all I can do, and it reminds me of what it was like." What was like? "To have once been human. I'm not sure even I know what that feels like anymore." "I'm sorry, John. I really am. But I need you." John went back downstairs, then outside, and was gone for a long time. He thought about her words for a long time, and they stuck in his craw. It was the dependence he didn't like. He wanted to feel desired, like he was important for being who he was, not because he had learned how to fix quantum field programmable gate arrays over the last few hundred years. He had thought several times about walking away, but he always found himself feeling sadness at the thought. As bad as it was, the machine he tended to, the once human machine, was his last connection to his species. John didn't know where everyone else had gone. He imagined several scenarios involving global apocalypse, but none of them seemed to ring true. Nuclear Armageddon didn't really bear out because he would have long since died of radiation poisoning. Some kind of pandemic, perhaps? But on his wanderings, he found little sign of even the buried ruins of civilization. Just the bunker in the forest and Buddha nature here and there. Little mini bunkers, most empty, with a few fragmented skeletons crumbled nearly into dust. He had no idea who had built the bunkers or who had occupied them, only the vaguest guesses that they had been burial sites or something similar, owing to the sarcophagi he found on raised stone tables. As he wondered, sometimes he heard her voice in his head. At first, he thought he might be losing it, but the mundane nature of the conversations gave away the fact that he had been given some sort of cerebral implant. "John?" "Yes?" "Are you okay? Did I make you angry?" "No." "You often go on long walks when you're upset. Where are you now?" "Looking at mini bunkers." "Tell me about them, John. Please, I would very much like someone to talk to." John high-stepped over a stand of prickly weeds growing up around the edge of the mini bunker closest to him. This one is..." He picked his way carefully along the edge of the structure where the weeds weren't as bad. "This one is in better repair than the others. It's got some kind of writing on the side. That's a change." "Describe the writing." "Curvy letters, a bit like Arabic or Devanagari. Nothing I recognize, but then again, it's been 14,000 years and I don't know everything you do." "From left to right, let's try that first. Describe them as accurately as possible." "Okay," said John. "First symbol looks like a pregnant bumblebee, only upside down. Like a couple of people fighting in a collapsed tent. Line through the bottom. Second symbol looks like a caterpillar. Two wavy lines with straight vertical lines coming out of the bottom. Third symbol..." "I recognize the language," she suddenly announced. "After two characters?" "I'm 75% certain it's not an Earth language." "What is it then?" "Udanese." "What in God's name is Udanese?" "Centuries ago, the people of Earth made first contact with an advanced otherworldly civilization, the So-Udan. Historical records say that they participated in some kind of exchange program with Earth. 200 of our people for 200 of theirs. Not so many that either civilization felt they couldn't put down an invasion or rebellion, not that either side intended that. My records say it did not end well for either side, however." "What happened?" "I don't know. I only know what was entered into the historical record after I was uploaded. Those aren't my memories, and I didn't experience them visually, but the text records say that for the 60 years following the exchange, civilization gradually started to decline on Earth. A few enclaves held out, including a substantial corporate cohort. But once it stopped being about a paycheck, a lot of people wandered off and decided to start over. They formed clans, tribes, and other large social groups based on shared identity or viewpoint, reproduced in excess, starved, and died. Maybe that's who those bones belong to. Perhaps they buried their kings or emperors or whatever. I'm just not sure," Q5017C said. "It was so long ago." "But you remember everything." Was that a sob? "I'm sorry, did I upset you?" asked John. "Just a little. It's all right." "Talk to me. Tell me about it. I'm heading back to the big bunker. I'll be there in an hour." John felt like a mongrel. He had let his bitterness drag down just about every conversation he'd had in the last 1,000 years with the only speaking entity still alive, if you could call a disembodied and uploaded copy of a human being alive. He wondered if that was really living, and suddenly felt very ashamed to be squandering his fleshly experience on pettiness. An hour later, John was back in the atrium, sitting on a stone ledge next to what had once been a large planter, now just filled with moist earth and bits of lichen-encrusted bark. "I'll read that book to you now," he said. "I've already read it," she said. "It's quite boring, and it's not even complete. I have a copy stored somewhere." "Then why did you need me to read it to you?" "I didn't." "Then why did I lug a 40-pound book up 3 flights of stairs?" "I want you to tell me how the book feels." "Well, I took a look at it, and to be honest, there's way too much exposition. The plot is full of holes, and I couldn't get sympathetic with the main character." Q5017C actually laughed. For the first time in hundreds of years, John heard laughter. "Touch the book for me, John. Tell me the sensation on your skin." John gingerly ran the edge of his little finger over the very outer edge of the almost toasted paper. He could feel the edges bounce off his fingerprints and shatter. The paper crumbled into dust, as he did. "Oops, I think I destroyed part of it." "It's okay. What did it feel like?" she asked. "Dry, fragile, but hints of something natural. Slightly fibrous and almost homeopathic essence of the tree it used to be. Barely there, but natural. It wasn't like stone or brittle plastic. It felt real, alive somehow. What is it they say? Everything has Buddha nature? It was like that." "Thank you, John. You have no idea how much hearing those words means to me. I remember paper. I remember smoke, sunsets, what dirt felt like under my feet. God only knows where those feet are now, or what has become of them, but I remember." "Feet are overrated. Mine itch right now." Q5017C laughed again. "I love the sound of your laughter," John said. "It reminds me of someone I once knew." "Tell me about her." "How did you know it was a she?" "Just a guess. Or a vague hope, I suppose. Go on." "She was a scientist," John began. "Long ago, but it seems like yesterday. She worked in AI at some research institute. I was an artist of sorts. I made things out of other things, mostly stuff people didn't want, but I looked at it and saw the value. She said I was a creature of heart, and she was one of mind. But you wouldn't say that if you knew her. She was a creature of heart also. Then..." Blissfully, she was silent as John sank into his thoughts. He didn't realize he still felt the pain of her loss. "Then," he continued, "I came home from the doctor one day, an oncologist. I hadn't been expecting to even talk to him, but my immunologist referred me on a hunch. He had started to notice that just walking up the stairs would send my IL-10 levels off the charts. At first, he referred me to a cardiologist. He ran some labs, found elevated CK and CRP levels, and thought I was having a stress reaction to physical activity. He handed it off to the immunologist when an additional battery of tests shows a severe immunological response to some unknown factor. My body was trying to fight whatever it was by making more and more of something, but it wasn't like the standard profile for known cancers, even things like lymphoma. The oncologist told me he thought I had about a year to live, possibly as little as 6 months. He said to try to relax and enjoy what I had left. "That's horrible," she said. "But I understand." I drove home to tell my wife. She didn't take it well. She said she needed time to think about what that meant, that this was all a very bad time for this to be happening. Then she told me she didn't mean to say it like that, and I told her that was all right, that it was natural, that it was okay to feel hurt and vulnerable. But she started crying, and then she drove off. She did that kind of thing when she got bad news. It was difficult for her to lean on anyone for support. She didn't want to be dependent. "That's so sweet," Q5017C said. "Kind of reminds me of us," John said. But? What are the odds?" John didn't say it as a question. The words just trailed off. "Whatever happened to your wife?" Q5017C asked. "She died that night. Car accident. The doctor said there was nothing they could do. She was too badly banged up. I never did get to go to the funeral. I'm not sure they even had one. I was almost catatonic with grief. I walked around like a zombie for a good 6 months. I never did get over it, to be honest." "What about you?" she asked. "How? Did anyone ever tell you how you got here? I mean, obviously no one did, but what was the last thing you remember?" "The black rain." "Black rain?" "When my doctors learned that there was no way to cure whatever it was I had, someone approached me about attempting stasis. I think they used to call it suspended animation, but it had never been successful on anything except dogs, and only when their body temperature was rapidly lowered to something like 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and they were placed in a gaseous mixture of hydrogen sulfide, DMSO, and some other stuff that was supposed to retard cell death. At least that's how it was explained to me. When I lay down in the chamber, I remember that it was very cold, that I could see out of the front of it just a little, and that the voices started to sound tinny and then faded entirely. I felt like I was falling into deep, deep water, but not drowning. After a while, I couldn't feel my toes or my fingers. I wanted to scratch my nose, but couldn't move. It wasn't frightening, but rather a bit like when you drift off to sleep. Then the silent black rain came. The stasis team had told me that was when my brain started to shut off the main senses of hearing and sight. It was like little pixels of my field of vision started to fail and fade into black, and it looked like rain. Then there was nothing but the rain. Everything was black, and then I woke up and you were there. That was the first time I awakened from the stasis chamber. Everything after that is patchy. I mean, I still have the downloads you gave me or whatever, the stuff I seem to know in order to make repairs. But the other stuff is missing. It's like, when I wake up, anything I actually learned by myself is wiped clean. I think those were other stasis chambers in the mini bunkers, John. I think someone else was trying to save people to awaken them later. Your backup employees? No, John, it wasn't me. I think something went wrong with the Udinese trade and what happened afterwards. I think those were the last people left. But I don't think any of that happened on Earth. It couldn't have. Society was collapsing. For some reason, I have schematics for the light and air circulation of this world, and it's all artificial. The only people saved would have been either those most useful to the powerful elites or those taken by the So'udan. But I think even they are gone now. I think it's just us right now, and maybe a scattering of others, somewhere. You want me to go out exploring? Asked John. See if I can find anyone else out there? Maybe some sign of the So'udan? Not right now, Q5017C said. All right, John, I wanted to ask you something, and it's kind of important. Go ahead. The people on the stasis team, who did they work for? Try to remember. Some outfit called the Southwest Institute for Life Advancement. Seemed like a bunch of crackpots, to be honest. But I was going to be dead in 6 months anyway, so why the hell not? Why did they approach you then, 6 months before you would have died? John sat lost in thought for a moment. I don't know. Seemed a bit eager to me at the time, now that you mention it. Think back to it, John, as hard as you can. It was in September. I don't remember what year, but it was the same year my wife died. I just signed the papers and forgot about it. I figured the whole thing would end up with my head in a freezer, and I just wanted to die anyway. John, Q5017C said, I was uploaded in late September of 2032 by the same Southwest Institute for Life Advancement. The company I worked for, Incipient Systems, paid a guy named Gronvelt an exorbitant amount of money to back up everything in my brain, down to the molecular level. They had only done it once before. I remember Incipient telling me that I was re-embodied. It could hardly have been a coincidence that they approached you soon after. Don't. Why? Tears welled up in John's eyes, and he realized he had never gotten over the death of his wife. It's too much to hope for. No one will ever replace Elise. Now, I would do anything to hold her in my arms again just one more time, to tell her I understood why she had to go for a drive and to ask her not to, but instead, here I am. They'd had this conversation hundreds of times before. It always ended the same way. John remembered Elise up to her death, but he didn't remember anything after that, including taking care of her for the last 14,000 years. I understand, John, she said. I once loved deeply, and I would have done anything to hold him again. I did my best, all I could do to keep my promise to him. If I have failed, it was for no lack of trying. Q5017C sighed. Elise was a name she had not heard in a very long time. For the life of her, she couldn't fathom of why John ceased to remember anything after the accident. Selective memory? Blocking out the trauma? Inability to accept that it was really her behind all the wires. Maybe, she thought, it's good that we forget. But not the feel of paper, the smell of rain, or the first kiss with our lifelong love. That John remembered, and it was enough. He took care of her, and she took care of him. They talked when he was awake, about life, or of nothing in particular. Maybe one day he'd remember. So she kept trying. Whatever else the world had in store for them, they would face it together and keep trying. John was too precious to give up trying, even after 14 millennia. I'm here, darling, she said, in the softest, most soothing voice the machinery could muster. I will always be here. Take all the time you need. Thank you for listening. We love our listeners, fans, and patrons here at Untold Tales, and we hope you love the stories that we're bringing to you month after month on the first of each month. Please consider leaving us a review on Podchaser. As always, we love our listeners, fans, and patrons. Have a wonderful day and a happy, happy New Year.